Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very honored on behalf of the Moroccan Center for Civic Education to welcome you all, participants from Morocco and also from outside Morocco. As you may know, the Moroccan Center for Civic Education has started a number of series of conferences and roundtables and meetings with our friends and colleagues from all over the world. And today, we have the privilege of hosting a webinar under the theme School Effectiveness in the COVID-19 Era. This time, our main partner is the Moroccan Association of Teachers of English, represented here by our colleagues and friend, Abdellah Yousfi. So as I said, our Moroccan Center for Civic Education is very pleased to welcome you all, and we would like you to be part of us as you did the last time with the early child education webinar. And please, if ever you feel that there is something going wrong, either to logistics or technology, it's just because we have prepared this webinar, at a short notice. First of all, let me hand it over to our friend and colleague, Dr. Mohammed Miski. Dr. Mohammed Miski is an associate clinical professor at the Arizona State University, who will kindly be introducing the speakers. And I take the opportunity to thank him warmly for the time and energy he has been investing in putting together anything that is related to the improvement of education, training, and scientific in Morocco, across the region, and all over the world. So thank you, Mohammed. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Silarbi, for your kind words, and it's a pleasure to be here with with my esteemed companions, and at the same time, it's a pleasure to have so many colleagues joining us on this very, very important gathering in the exchange. And it would be my privilege also to introduce my three colleagues, Professor Kathryn Riley, and Professor Anton Florek, and Mr. Yousfi Abdellah. So just by way of introduction of Professor Kathryn Riley, she's a professor of urban education at University College in London, specifically at the Institute of Education, and an international scholar whose work bridges policy and practice. Her international experience has included heading up the World Bank's Effective Schools in Teachers Group in Washington and projects with UNICEF and OECD. She was a keynote speaker at the International Congress for School Effectiveness and Improvement that was held in Morocco, January 2020. And I'm sure many of you were at that event. And I'm sure many of you were at her keynote speech. Professor Riley began in education as a volunteer teacher in Eritrea before teaching in inner city schools, holding political office in London and working as a local authority chief officer. Kathryn's research and development work has focused on schools and communities in diverse and deprived neighborhoods in many parts of the world. With dance poet Tio Molina, she is also the co-founder of the Art of Possibilities, working with schools and communities to develop new forms of partnership and helping create schools as places of belonging. She's currently collaborating with school leaders in different parts in the UK with the aim of understanding their experiences and those of the staff and young people in their schools as well, in these very difficult times, and identifying what kind of leaders and leadership are needed for the future. I've taken the liberty to actually put her the link to her website on the chat box, just for you if you want to learn more things about the body of research of Professor Kathryn Riley, of course, with her some of the videos and activities. For Professor Anton Florek, he's the director of the Anton Florek Associates Limited and the strategic advisor of the Staff College in Manchester, England. He has served there as chief executive from March 2004 to April 2018, following 4 years as executive director of the same college. In addition to numerous publications, Anton has served on many national steering advisory groups over the past 40 years, including membership of the National Reference Group for Championing Children, which created the seminal document for the Every Child Matters initiative in England, and the Leadership and Management Policy Group of the Children's Workforce Network, through which he was instrumental in writing, leading, and managing children's services in England, a national professional development framework. Professor Florek is a life member of the International Congress for School Effectiveness and Improvement and a passionate advocate for inclusive schooling and achieving excellence through equity. Anton is currently working with head teachers in a number of local authorities in England and Scotland on school-led models of improvement and collective local accountability for improving outcomes for all children and young people. And we also have our esteemed colleague, Abdellah Yousfi. He is an educational supervisor and inspector working with the Ministry of National Education here in Morocco. He has served in this capacity in a number of regions across the country and is now in service at the Regional Directorate of Skhirat Mara. He has participated and presented in many national and international events inside and outside the country, including ICSI 2020. I'm sure you've met with Abdellah when he was with us in Marrakesh. His interests are, among others, or include the future of education, the future of change, sustainable education, assessment, and ICT. And Mr. Yousfi is also the US Ambassador of Goodwill. He is the current president of the Moroccan Association of Teachers of English, and he's been doing a fantastic job in that position. So I'm just on your behalf, I'm just giving all of them a gigantic virtual round of applause.
Thank you so much, Mohammed. Thank you for your excellent introduction of our distinguished speakers. But you have talked about ICSI, and we still have some of the outcomes of ICSI 2020 that was held in Morocco and hosted by the Moroccan Center for Civic Education and the Ministry of Education. And that's why we would like to start with a video, a brilliant video that has made history. And I have the honor to let our friend and colleague, Professor Kathryn Riley, to introduce this video. Kathryn.
It's such a brief introduction. I hope the video conveys to you the love and joy and energy that we all had working together in Morocco, and you will see something of the belonging story. And I think what shines out from the video, and if for any reason it goes wobbly and you don't get to see it, it is on the website and we can make sure that you see it. But the pièce de résistance are the young people, and you see, of Morocco speaking up with a wonderful sense of agency, and I think that very clearly in the video. So I hope you're going to enjoy this video now.
Thank you, Professor Kathryn Riley.
somewhere where you can feel safe in your identity and comfortable in who you are. In our volatile and difficult world, schools need to be places of belonging. A school is just a building. What matters is what goes on inside. Young people who feel they belong do better in their examinations. They feel good about themselves.
Relationship is really powerful, and many educators know this intuitively. So this is where students feel that their teachers are there to care for them and show them emotional support as well as academic support. And it's also when students feel that their teachers treat them fairly within the context of the classroom.
When the young people feel that they belong in school, not only shape how they feel now, but how they see their future in our planet.
Wow, this is brilliant. Lovely memories.
Indeed.
From Morocco and from ICSE 2020. So thank you so much, Professor Kathryn, really. And our warm thanks should go to our friend and brother, Roberto Tio Molina, co-director of the Art of Possibilities.
Who did all the music, and he sends his greetings to you all from Cuba. I've just spoken to him. So I think, guys, if you like this, if you go into your reactions, you can at least put a thumbs up to that one or a wave. So those of you out there, we can just see a sea of names. Can you get to your reactions and give a reaction to the video? Anybody? Do you know how to do that?
Nadine's
yeah, thank you, Rob. Yeah, one person likes it.
Yeah.
A few more of it. Great, thank you, Samira. Yeah, great. Okay. And yeah, I think it represents something very wonderful that you have here to build on in Morocco. Yes, thank you, Omar. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. So let's start our discussion. And my first question to all of the speakers here is, what do we mean when we say school effectiveness? Professor Kathryn Riley.
Well, I think my answer to that is probably not the textbook one, but I think for me it's three parts. School effectiveness, and a school that to me is an effective one. It has really strong reciprocal relationships between schools and communities. There is a partnership there because that's what builds a school to start with. It's a school where young people feel that they have a sense of safety and belonging, because when that happens, they achieve great exam results. And effective schools are ones where staff, that's teachers, as well as the young people, have a sense of agency. And for me, agency is the belief that what you can do can make a difference, but the school gives you the skills to do it and the opportunities. And this for me is where head teachers come in, and they're even more key, which is something I'll talk about a little bit later on, in creating the conditions for belonging, and the conditions for compassion, which is really what we need at the moment. So that would be my definition.
Thank you so much. Professor Anton Florek.
I'd add to that by thinking about the outcomes. So for me, effective schools are schools that prepare students to grow into caring, purposeful, contributing citizens who are proud of their heritage, but really confident and look forward to the future with hope. So I always argue that schools are in the hope business. You must never forget that. That's what we give, is hope. And we prepare young people for the excitement of life with confidence. The second element really is, particularly over the last 10 years or so, that the shift has happened in terms of the role of the teacher. For me, effective schools, the teachers in effective schools are mediators of learning. They're no longer transmitters of knowledge, because the whole context of acquisition of knowledge has changed. And the final element is really that effective schools should be a creative experience for everybody in them, both students and teachers. So it's a creative and hopeful endeavor.
Thank you, Professor. Professor Abdellah Yousfi.
Thank you, Ahmed. I would add to both what Kathryn said and Anton, that I think the general perspective for me for what a school, effective school is this agricultural model of education, that where schools invest in their students and learners in the same way farmers invest in their plants and trees in that garden. Means providing the necessary environment for growth, having a very clear vision shared by both administrators, including policymakers, as well as people who are at the implementing level, teachers and students and head teachers, principals of schools, all should share the same vision about learning, so that they can collaborate together in a harmonious way, in a very cohesive perspective, to achieve those objectives. So to sum it up, I think effective schools should have clear vision, work collaboratively, give people a chance to self-actualize, and then all that in a very safe and harmonious environment. That's it, Abi.
Thank you, Si Abdellah. Now, according to you, distinguished speakers, how are the Ministry of Education's schools, councils, states, how are they dealing with the teaching and the learning during COVID-19, these difficult times? Have they encountered any challenges? Professor Kathryn Riley?
Yeah, thanks, Lovey. For those of you not familiar, as my good colleague Anton reminded us, our education systems are divided up. So I'm just going to talk about England at the moment, because Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland are different. And I have to say, in England, those of us in education have absolutely struggled to work out what the government has been trying to tell us, and that has been a huge, huge problem with conflicting information and demands and so on. I want to put that aside, because what has then happened within the system we've had some incredible stepping up into the space through our municipalities, our school systems, and in terms of what schools have done. So in the localities, the way the local systems have come together and brought everybody working together has just been astounding. When you come to the schools, it's almost hidden what the schools are doing, but the schools have been doing extraordinary things. I'm privileged to be working with 3 groups of head teachers, or 18 head teachers in different parts of the country, to hear their story. And it is just amazing examples of schools. Obviously they've been doing things on IT, but they've been doing basic things in the poorer areas, delivering food, delivering books, just doing everything that they can to support the young people in their communities, doing videos, and then kids have been doing videos and sending back. So there have been some incredible stories, but some real concerns too about young people who've just not been able to participate for different kinds of reasons. And I'm going to come to that later on, because how we respond to them is really important. And certainly my concerns from our government, from the national level, is how they're talking about this. So they're talking about the remedial problems and catch up, which is a kind of negative, and for young people who've had a difficult time, seems to me to lack compassion. So I think compassion is a way that we will move forward and enable young people to just gain their confidence and develop as we would wish to see them developed.
Thank you, Kathryn. Anton, what do you think?
I'll give a perspective from Wales, where I live, and from Scotland, where I've been doing some work. In Wales, central government in Wales, I think, has been quite careful and measured in the way it has supported distance learning during the lockdown period. Firstly, it already had a really well-used online learning portal. So it had that at its disposal, and it's found its time properly. So people who are kind of ambiguous about using it have realized how useful it can be. One of the challenges during this period to all governments is, once you've closed schools, you really shouldn't close them until you have a plan to come out the other side and reopen them. So in Wales, there is a published plan for the reopening of schools that includes a phased return to school. Because of social distancing, or physical distancing, which would be more accurate, only a third of pupils will be able to return at any one time for quite the foreseeable future. So they've divided classes into thirds, and they'll do 2 days in, and then 3 days off, but on a 2-week cycle. And it'll be a blended approach with face-to-face contact with teachers, and then planned online follow-up at home. Now, clearly, for some pupils that have challenges to do with technology, or just because of the circumstances of their families, additional support will be put in through children's social care and other vehicles to enable those children to fully participate. That also includes government provision of laptops, tablets, etc., and routers as well. So that's Wales. In Scotland, I want to give you a slightly different perspective, because I've also been observing how municipalities, how councils have been behaving. And it varies massively. Some are carrying on as if nothing's happened in terms of the way they communicate. So you just get an email every now and then saying, you know, the refuse tips are closed, or this is closed, or that's closed, or that's open. Whereas in Scotland, there's a particular council called Dumfries and Galloway. They very early on decided that they would invite citizens to help them communicate with citizens. And their communication portal is completely managed by volunteers and citizens. So it's very graphic, it's very open, it's very compelling in the way it communicates. And all the formal stuff is included, but it's so engaging, you just want to trawl through everything to find out. So those are my reactions. One is how municipalities choose to communicate with citizens and engage them in the challenges. And the other is a central government that has been careful in its planning and is quite meticulous in how things are going to be. So there's no ambiguity in Wales. We know on a given date that schools will be back. It's a third of classes each, and schools are preparing for it.
Thank you, Anton. How about Morocco, Si Abdellah?
And the Moroccan story is a little bit different. I'm going to seize this opportunity to give a big shout out to all teachers, Moroccan teachers, teachers of English particularly, who have saved the face of the Moroccan government. You know, like any government has been caught by surprise. We were not ready for any kind of distance remote learning or learning from home. So when the problem was there, when the ministry threw it to teachers, they had to do what they could to reach out to their learners and try to finish up the program. Mainly, this also had one positive thing, is that it has a negative side of it, but I'm going to start with the positive. The positive is that all teachers felt that they were meant by reaching out to students by hooks or crooks. So they needed to do all they could to share, I mean, at least the learning content, the lessons and courses with the learners. But this is also a certainty for the government that as far as teacher training is concerned, teachers should get some kind of ICT skills, basic ICT skills, to be able to communicate with their students and reach out everyone in their homes. So that was one point. The ministry, I would say, has for a country who has been caught by surprise, it has scored a 10 out of 10 score, I would say, because it did all it could using all the TV channels and radio stations to reach out to those marginalized people in the countryside, in rural areas, as well as in city and urban areas. They had like 4 TV channels running in tandem and trying to give recorded lessons to students in their houses, in their confinement, their quarantine outside. So because we did not have any prior experience in distance learning in our schools, I would say this opportunity has been a very, very important one for teachers, for principals, for the ministry, for parents. They have valued the efforts that teachers have invested in reaching out to their students. Basically, they were using very common, I would say, cheaper means of reaching out to students, because they had to reach the majority of learners rather than the privileged ones. So I would say the problem was overcome, at least I would say in a ratio of 70 to 75% success. Probably the psychological aspect was missing because we were mainly targeting, preparing people for examinations, and we were more about exam orientation than education, value raising, backing up learners as future, I would say, workforce or task force. That's it, Ahmed.
And yeah, do you think, Si Abdellah, that technology has helped in terms of providing real and meaningful learning opportunities for all learners?
Yeah, well, that's what I mentioned when I was talking about.
Has there been any limitations, challenges?
Yeah, I mean, certainly there is this achievement gap has been, I would say, uncovered, because there was a big difference between people who had access to technology, and I would say there were people who had access to video-based interaction forms of learning, and there were people who only had to get, they have to limit themselves to WhatsApp and Facebook group. That's mainly the basic minimum means of interaction, those social media things, because they were the most common among people. And it was difficult for people who didn't have internet at home to have such platforms, those learning LMS, I would say, techniques. They couldn't afford to access their teachers synchronically, face-to-face, and have direct interaction. So they had to, mainly teachers had to manage everyone according to his own case and situation, to manage the case as it appears to him, and mostly as I observed, as someone who was tracking the process of learning. Mostly they used WhatsApp either through making photos of lessons and transmitting them to students, or making audios full with instructions for students. And some of them used Google platforms or Teams. And the gap was a little bit there. I mean, there were people who had access and people who were totally excluded because they didn't have access to those forms. But the government, in cases where it was difficult to get access to resources, they had some kind of packages, pedagogic packages made for them, and they send it to them with the help of local communities sometimes, and sometimes with the help of the principals of schools. I'm talking mainly about primary school, and some of the middle school principals used that. So basically, I would say, I mean, the problem was there, but it was more a situation to learn from than a situation to suffer from, because there were great lessons that were taken by the government from the situation. And I think it's the first time we feel that distance learning and the integration of technology is given its share in the learning process.
Oh, thank you, Abdellah. This is very, very important. Kathryn and Anton, let's start with Kathryn. Any lessons learned, any best practices in terms of using technology in England and in Wales? Let's start with Kathryn.
Well, I think there is a difference between the technology and how you think about learning and the pedagogy. On a real simple level, maybe like lots of people, I had a reasonable understanding of how to do, Skype and whatever, but I'd never used Zoom. And so on a really practical thing, I've had people who've been showing me bits of Zoom, and Anton was one of those who directed me to some interesting things. And then have been showing me, and I've been teaching other people who've been teaching other people, which is a fabulous way because it connects a lovely community of learners. But what I have found, so I've been teaching a lot this term, and I took a module. So this is for my university students, master's students, called Leading in Diverse Cultures and Communities. And it's a difficult module because you're talking about really challenging stuff. And I think what we have to think about is how we communicate. How do you get compassion? How do you get connections? How do you get a sense of agency when you have people online? And that's actually really important. And guys, you know what I'm going to do now? I'm going to ask you all at some point, you're all sitting there and we can't see you, and it'd be so nice to be able to say hello to you, because that's part of the connections. Because I think to get our students to be connected, they have to feel that they're a part of something. So maybe at Alabi, in a little while, you can just ask people to just come online and say hello, because I think that these are the things that are so important, and they are as important as the technical thing and as your internet working and which platform do you use.
Sure, we will, Kathryn. Anton, how about the case in Wales and Scotland?
Well, as I said earlier, Wales already had a really well used and quite refined online learning platform to build on. So it kind of, its time has come in that sense. But I think there are some important potential lessons to learn from here. A lot of my work is with policymakers, and it's been interesting doing workshops with them about what is it that they're going to leave behind after this period, and what are they going to take forward. The same with social workers. We've discovered that if we call meetings to talk about what I call plumbing, you know, processes, procedures, you don't need to be face to face. So stop dragging people across countries, across municipalities for meetings like that, and use face-to-face meetings where it's critically important, where you do need direct human contact. So I think potentially we might end up with a greater efficiencies, and I think there are parallels there into the classroom. There'll be periods when face-to-face contact is vital, but at other times it may not be. So let's learn from what we've had to be innovative about and say, we will gain more face-to-face quality by not using face-to-face for everything anymore, because we don't need to. And I think that's I think something to take away from all of this.
Thank you, Anton. And Anton, if you don't mind, you know, I personally attended a number of your lectures, presentations. Namely, I still remember the one in Singapore, in Norway, in Morocco, and you've mentioned the fourth industrial revolution and school transformation. How can you relate this to COVID-19?
That's an interesting question. And I started thinking about that. But what I've been doing during this period is I've been really lucky because I've been able to observe events and record them as they have been happening. Generally speaking, those working in the public sector, we kind of look back once things have happened and try and make sense of them. Now, in my work, I've been trying to make sense of things as they are happening. So I will connect back to the fourth industrial revolution, but I've prepared a few slides to share with colleagues of my thinking to date. So if you don't mind,
go ahead.
I'll pull this up and share my screen, and let's see where we go. Okay, hopefully you should be able to see that. So the first question is, you know, are we really going back into the box we came out of? It seems to me, you know, unimaginable that we, humankind, won't learn from the experiences we've been involved in. And in doing this work, I came across a think piece by Yuval Noah Harari, and this was written in April. Sorry, it was written very early March and end of February. And he was saying humankind is now facing a global crisis, perhaps the biggest crisis of our generation. But what he says to us, and I'm happy to share this with colleagues on the call here, that we'll inhabit a different world. So I started thinking about what do we mean by that. He also goes on to say many short-term emergency measures will become a fixture of life, because that's the nature of emergencies. So many things that have been put in place may very well stay rather than be pulled back. The other thing that's happened is decisions that normally take a long time through consultation, etc., happening in a matter of hours. And to go back to something Kathryn said about the government in England, I would say that decisions are made in a matter of minutes, often very ill considered. It's been my experience. And then finally, we're all involved increasingly in large scale social experiments. I mean, countries have never closed schools unilaterally in the way we've had to do it in many countries. You know, the notion of governments shutting down their internal economies, of the world marketplace being closed, are unprecedented and unique in that sense. So they're not normal times. And then finally, he reminds us that we have choices as human beings. The first is how we are managed. On the one side of the spectrum is the totalitarian surveillance model, and best examples of that are China, South Korea, etc. And citizen empowerment models of managing, and a good example of that is the Swedish model, which has been a very different model to most countries. Now, which is the best one, only time will tell us long term, because I think all of us are increasingly coming to realize this is going to be a long haul. And the second is the difference between national isolation and global solidarity. So I compare what's happening in the USA and possibly Brazil and one or two other countries which have internalized what's happening. And then the quest, driven interestingly by people like Bill Gates, to try and have solutions which belong globally. So if there are vaccines developed, they will be people's vaccines, not countries' vaccines. And whatever wealth he and his network have, they represent wealth that is greater than many countries, so they can make an influence. And they seem to be operating in a philanthropic way to try and create a sense of global responsibility. So over the past 3 months, we at the Staff College, we've spent time, and I've spent a lot of my time, observing how the pandemic has impacted on people's lives, and then trying to think about what changes to individual and collective behaviours have emerged as a result of what we're trying to do and deal with. So firstly, it seems to me that if you judge by the daily media, and I'm now monitoring media, you know, pretty much across the world currently, that very few, if any, have been left totally untouched. Even those Pacific Rim islands that have had no cases at all, they are indirectly affected because their economies will be impacted by the shutdown in the global economy. And then secondly, we're witnessing many of the actions described by Harari on a regular basis. So I see decisions made on the hoof, politicians being caught in public. I see social media being absolutely savage to those in public leadership positions when they feel what they're deciding is ill-considered and unjust. You know, not just in the UK, but across the world. So in trying to interpret and understand all of this, you know, it seems to me that we might usefully frame this as citizen responses. And I'm suggesting there are 3 areas to look at. One is personal citizenship. That's the relational and the moral one. So how we individually or in our families have managed our respective responsibilities. And a good example of that, and I can only draw on the UK, is despite what the behavioural psychologists were telling government about lockdown, by and large, and certainly until the last 2 weeks in the UK, most citizens complied very, very tightly with the lockdown procedures, many of which were advisory, they weren't mandatory, but people have really responded on a personal level to keep their families and themselves as safe as possible. The second citizenship model is societal citizenship, which is an economic, a workplace one, and a societal one generally. And I think good examples of that is how things in the workplace have started changing. There are many countries, many companies, Twitter being one of them, who've now decided that their workforce can remain working at home if they choose to. And there are all sorts of issues around that. The latest thing in that is IKEA, who've decided that in the 9 countries that have provided them with support, financial support during lockdown to help them stay in business, they are now going to give all that money back across those nine countries because it's the right thing to do, unquote, the CEO. And that is an individual company that operates beyond individual companies, having a societal responsibility and realizing that it's not been impacted as badly as it thought it might be. And then the third impact area is global citizenship. And I just think there are so many examples now of COVID-19 raising the profile of the challenge of global warming, the environmental stuff, the ecological stuff, and where we as human beings fit in our relationship with nature. So the satellite images of the reduction in pollution, for example, over China, over Europe, have been quite compelling and telling, really. So is it really on the cards that we're going to put ourselves back into all of that without at least thinking about it? Some governments, in supporting businesses, have put environmental and ecological conditions on that they become more green in thanks of being supported by central government of this time. So in the conclusion, really, they are all interconnected and have a moral aspect to all of them. But I think what this produces is this notion that increasingly in the future, we'll look back at this period and characterize it as before COVID and after COVID, much like we have BC and AD or whatever in that sense. So are we simply going back into the same box we came out of after this surreal period of time out? Or are we going to go back to somewhere which is potentially different and better? Mm-hmm. So I have a question for all of you listening, really, and for you to pop into your chat, really, very quickly, and then we'll stop. Do you really think we're going back into the box we came out of? And if you could pop your responses, please, with reasons in the chat column, we might be able to get some sense then of whether what I'm proposing as a framework to think about not only now, but what kind of schooling is going to happen and how it's going to make better sense across those 3 areas of citizenship for both teachers and young people going forward.
Thank you so much, Anton. This is really, really interesting. Kathryn and Abdullah, any comments, anything to add to what
can I have 2 minutes? Can I have 2 minutes?
Said?
I just
maybe
want
2 minutes each.
Yeah.
Sure.
Hello, Ahmed?
Yes, Abdullah.
Can I have a minute or two just to comment?
Are you going to show your PowerPoint now?
Okay, I'm sharing my PowerPoint, and at the same time, it's my personal point of view. I was going to say that Anton was reading my mind before he started talking about the Irish experiment in terms of distance learning. This is my dream at the beginning, and I shared it with so many colleagues. And I think probably that would be the second step for our society here. And to react to Anton's question, I am one of the people who think that you're not going to get back to the old box, but probably we need to start a new era of history that is going to be dated by coronavirus, as you said. This post-COVID is going to be a new era for the humanity, I guess. And I think the starting point for our government, I'm not here talking in the capacity of a government representative, but I'm talking about a personal opinion as an inspection supervisor. And I think now that we have to live in a situation where we get to cohabit with the enemy, it's a kind of cohabitation with the enemy, which is the virus COVID-19. The government will have to reduce the number of classes, certainly, because we used to have classes with an average of 32 to 40 students per class, and then we have to reduce the number of attendance per session. Normally we're going to have people attending in the morning sessions and others in the afternoon sessions. And probably then we have to expand the number of classrooms and open spaces for teaching and learning. And also consider the seating arrangement given this security measure of taking physical distance into consideration. And I believe if we have to bear all this in mind, we will be moving towards a kind of blended learning. And my perspective is this. I mean, I'm going to build on the hypothesis that now every individual, every learner is unique. Every learner can self-actualize according to their own capacities and capabilities. And I guess the school, as I would say, as a company, will have to respond to every student's need. And within this perspective, I guess that the courses will have to be divided into core subjects according to interest that students give to each particular subject, and electives. I'm going to give an example. If say a student likes mathematics and music, for example, and history and geography, he may take all those three subjects instead of having this compartmental separation between the left brain and the right brain, saying that scientific people are different and art-oriented people are different. I think a blending of those capacities is now possible. And if we could look at schools as possible garden for where we're going to invest in cultivating those individual capacities, schools have to give enough freedom to learners to choose what they want to do, but they will choose within two perspectives. One is going to be centered on core subjects, which need more, I would say, profound dynamic learning, and that has to be done in face-to-face situations. So whereas elective subject means subject that maybe would be of some kind of help, secondary help to learners, might be taken as distance, but I stress that distance learning should also involve an element of action, should be involve kind of project work supervised by the teacher of the course, I mean the teacher. And this is the description of the face-to-face subject could be like core subject areas be taken face-to-face with an in-person involvement. They have to make individual choices, and schools have to cater for that. Distance learning, however, is going to be based on projects. It's also going to be based on availability and easy access of online data, which leads me to stress the importance of school digital identity. By this, I mean that every school should have its own identity in terms of resources, so that it can make those resources available for students either synchronously or asynchronously, and either giving chances for everyone according to its own availability to attend them, or see them later on when if they are not able to attend face to face, they can just log on and go to the Moodle or to the website of the school and get enough information.
Thank you,
Siaima. That's my
thank you, Si Abdellah. Sorry for interrupting you. I'll hand it over now to Kathryn, and afterwards, maybe we'll take a 5 minutes break and give the audience the floor to react before moving to our last component in this webinar. Professor Riley?
So Alabi, would you like me to do my little discussion input now? Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Share my PowerPoint,
please.
or shall we do that after break? Or is that what you'd like me to do now?
Yes, please.
Yes, I'm going to do my little input before we have a break. I was just checking. So, Anton, if you don't mind, then
Okay.
be great.
Okay. Okay.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
just bear with me a moment.
Okay. Well, Anton's got my PowerPoint, so I'll just talk for a minute. I was asked by our teachers union, the National Education Union, to put together some ideas, really based on research, but based on practice too, about what do we know from research about schools, and particularly about schools as places of belonging, almost as a kind of, not a guidance, but a reminder about the really, really important things to hang on to when you get into school. So my little PowerPoint is based on that. And for those of you who know my work, so Anton, yeah, we can just go to the first one. My work is about, do you want to go back to the beginning? Here we go. So yeah, here we go, back to the beginning, right back to the beginning. It says, yeah, that's it. Well, compassionate leadership, stop at compassionate leadership. Anton, that's the first one. Cool. And now keep going, right from the beginning, that's it. You keep going past it, that's it, stop. Great, wonderful. Because I think that image is really important. So I've talked about unlocking possibilities, because I think it's the positive way. If we go into this now, and with the language of the deficit, of remedial or catch up, we are compounding problems. And next slide, please, Anton. Because if we look at where we are at this world, which is a turning point. You know, COVID has exposed the divisions within and across society, and that has been so powerfully shown here. And the ways in which those on the margins of society have been most exposed to its impact. We've had some very serious issues and problems. I know from work that my daughter is doing, real issues about vulnerable people, increase in modern day slavery, people who've been abused under the cover of all of this. So some really difficult stuff. And then if we look, next slide, at all of this, and one of the things about this image, the one before, the COVID one, Anton, the one before this, is that if you look at that image,
something strange is happening.
Something strange is happening, is it, with the PowerPoint? So the COVID image, it's very beautiful, isn't it? It's surreal to see how beautiful that is. And then when we look and we think, you know, who in Morocco, I'm getting a clear idea of who here has it been really difficult for. You know, for people with money, it's been, you know, difficult, but you've had to bed down, but you get your food delivered. And some people have really missed out. And then the next slide, we still live in a world on the move, a world of refugees. You know, they're still there, and the issues and the problems are so powerful. Next slide. However, this is the positive, isn't it? What has the pandemic taught us, if anything? That wisdom and compassion help build connections in communities. And so the message that I was giving to teachers here is wisdom and compassion, but actually they pretty well know that. They know that that's what they need to be doing, and that leadership matters, that school matters, and belonging matters. So that my work on belonging, and other people's too, seems to me so central. So the next slide, Anton, you know, that belonging, that sense of being somewhere where you can be confident you will fit in and safe in your identity. So if young people, children, are not physically there, how do you create that sense of belonging, confidence, feeling that you're a part of something? It's really important. So the next two slides, the next slide is just a reminder of why I've been focusing on these issues and why other people have been, because we know this stuff matters. We know this matters for more disadvantaged young people, and we know that young people who feel they don't belong in school and who are excluded seek belongingness elsewhere, on the streets, in the gangs, and all of those kinds of issues. But moving forward, we have these opportunities to remember that when you create that sense of belonging, look at the outcomes, motivation, reductions in absenteeism, improved academic achievement. And then this really important thing of agency. And I think that that is such a critical thing, and I'm just going to come back to that in a minute. So the next slide, what I'm trying to do in the next slide here is I kind of did a review and said, okay, we know that what schools do makes a difference. Those of you in schools will know what you say and do every day with the children, young people, makes a difference. And I just tried to organize my thinking around three kind of elements. So the outside in, it's what happens, how schools respond to young people when they come into school, the outside in. The in-school bit, relationships and the environment, what on earth is actually going on? You know, a school is, I used to say, a school is just a building. A school is just a building, but now it's not even a building. It's a much more amorphous thing. It's a relationship, it's a connection. It's not even necessarily a building. And the issue of leadership and agency, which I'm going to come to. So if you go to the next slide, Anton. So what I did here was say, okay, given what we know, what are 5 questions that we might want to be asking in our school situation? And the first one is this: outside in, whose voices are being heard and whose do we need to hear? You know, certainly when you hear ministers here talking about schools, they have no idea of what young people, we're not hearing the voices of young people. We don't know what they think. So whose voices are we hearing? Whose voices do you hear in Morocco? Who do we actually know? I've just had a little thing from somebody saying that they can't hear. Now, I'm not quite sure what I can do about that, but I'm just saying that to the techie people to check the sound thing. But somebody just sent that in the chat thing that they couldn't hear properly. The second issue is relationships, okay? All of you out there know it, but the research also backs it up. That relationship that you have with your student is the most important thing for young people, creating their sense of belonging. So relationships matter. So the question is, how can teacher-student relationships be strengthened in this transition period? How do we do it? It's going to be different. The third one is safety, because we know that safety, physical and emotional, are so important for young people, to their sense of belonging, to their sense of learning, and so on. So how are the young people feeling? Where do they feel safe? Some children don't feel physically safe coming back to school. All of the worries and fears about that are really significant. Leadership. Is leadership working to create a culture of compassion? So some of you might be sitting there and saying, I wish there was a culture of compassion in the school that I'm working in. But actually, if there is no culture of compassion, and if the school leaders are first of all not compassionate to themselves, because this is a really difficult time for all of us, then how can they be compassionate to the teachers, and how can the teachers be compassionate to young people? So ironically, I'd already started writing and thinking about compassionate leadership, but I'm now talking about compassionate leadership for place and belonging. These are really, really important. A little message from someone to say, can you have the PowerPoint presentation? Absolutely. Please do send them out to people. And the final one is agency. Our staff and young people be encouraged to develop their sense of agency. Now, agency is the key bit. Agency is the belief that you can make a difference. It's the skills to make a difference, and it's the opportunities to make the difference. And the leaders are the people who can enact that agency, whether it's the leadership within schools or from the municipality. So these were 5 questions that I posed for people to think about. You know, when in your context, whose voices are you hearing? How can teacher-student relationships be strengthened? Where are the safe places emotionally and physically for young people? Is the leadership creating a culture of compassion? And are we developing a sense of agency? And if we just go to the last image here, which, you know, and there's a lovely one which this lovely picture from Morocco, I think came from Mohammed. Whose voices are we hearing and whose do we need to hear is so important, because if we are to reconfigure and be really thinking about our schools in a different kind of way, we have to be listening to all these different voices. Some time ago, I've written lots of books, but one of the first books I wrote had a brilliant title, and the title of that book was "Whose School Is It Anyway?" Now, it's the title is so great. I mean, I think the book wasn't bad either, but whose school is it anyway? So as we are beginning to reconfigure, we have to be saying, who are we listening to? And as somebody just said, student voices matter. And it's not just, you know, what you want in the canteen, it's their learning, their future. The future is theirs. So I think this is the most significant thing. And so the 5 questions I put are ones that are going out to lots of teachers here in the UK, and I hope they're useful to you. So I'm going to end there, and that's my little input.
Thank you so much, Professor Riley.
Thank you, Anton.
That's very, very, very interesting. Anton and Abdellah, everybody knows that you were one of the active people during, of course, including our colleague Kathryn Riley and others. You have been very active at ICSE 2020. And following what Kathryn Riley has just said, now my question to you is, what would have we prioritized during ICSE 2020 in the wake of COVID-19? Any thought? 2 minutes each before giving the floor to our audience.
I'm just going to jump in and say one thing. For those of you who were there in any of our sessions, those young people that we met and contributed their thinking were incredible. So I'm saying you've already got a whole network of young people, and I would be contacting and working with them to say, show them the video. What do they think? What do you think we should be doing? And setting the agenda from them. I think that's such an obvious thing.
Okay, that's a good point, Kathryn. Thank you. Anton, Abdellah, 1 to 2 minutes.
I want to build on what Kathryn said, really, because I came away from ICSE really buzzed up by the quality of dialogue and engagement with the young people. For the first time at ICSE ever, we had young people genuinely participating in symposia, in the 3P network symposia at ICSE. And they gave a very powerful story. And in fact, in the second symposium, they told their story to a colleague from the ministry.
Yeah, that was fabulous. Yeah.
And I'm fairly confident that at some point in Morocco, I think I've probably met the future female Minister of Education of Morocco. You know,
wow.
So I think you have some very powerful young people who understand not only themselves and where they want to go, but also they have a very strong sense of heritage and destiny in terms of being a global citizen. So I think you ought to be congratulated. And for me, I think having spent more time at ICSE Morocco to invite even more of those young people, looking back, would have enriched it even more further, I think. Thank
you, Anton. Any thought, Abdellah?
Yeah, I'm just going to go back to Anton's talk about the fourth industrial revolution, and I'm going to bridge from there to say what I think could be some of the concerns of the learning generations in Morocco. And I hope that technology is going to be playing a huge role in the accessibility of learning. I mean, people will be accessing learning through technology, and it's a very, very important element. There's also a psychological aspect of learning, that sense of belonging and hope that we've been talking in ICSE. And I think they were one of the major, or two of the major themes or topics that were hovering in the sky of ICSE across the 6 days. And I think they are very, very important in building the personality of the learner and the context in which that personality is going to grow. I'm still having this agricultural model in mind, that people have to grow within a very, I would say, tolerant, a very welcoming environment so that they could give the best of themselves and self-achieve. I think Morocco is going to be a big farm where we could cultivate all these qualities. And I think, as you have witnessed, we have a lot of young people now that are promising to become, or to have a say in the future as people who could, self-actualize through distance learning, through online learning, through collaboration with people, through community development, professional communities development, and so on. So I think there is a big perspective for people to develop and grow the way they like in the future, inshallah.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Si Abdellah. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to give the floor to our audience, and on your behalf, I would like to thank them for having been able to join us on this webinar. Audience, the floor is yours. Abdellah?
I think it may be, does the host need to unmute people? Everybody's muted.
Alabi, in the chat box, there's quite a lot about student voice, so maybe asking some of the people who made those comments to say why it's important and what's happening here would be fantastic. Yeah.
Okay. I can hear some voices.
It looks like Nadine. I'm seeing Nadine to be the first one who unmuted herself. Omar. Okay. Anyway, I'm not going to like ask anybody to ask a question, but to ready to ask a question. Nadine. Hello. Okay, in the interest of time, Silarbi, I was looking at the chat as well. So there is this question about, like, Kathryn that raised the Kathryn referenced about the student's voice and why it matters. But there was a question also that was posed by one of the participants: is how can we move forward in ways that will include all young learners? So this emphasis on inclusiveness. So how do we secure that during the COVID era and the post-COVID era? And then there is another question: is how can we encourage a sense of belonging in Moroccan schools? That's another school I'm getting, or that's another question. And please do not hesitate to turn on your cameras right now. If that would be highly encouraged at this stage. And if and I would also plead with you, if there are no questions, just mute yourselves.
Karima,
but please turn on your camera. Go ahead, Karima.
Yeah, Karima, go ahead. Could you please?
I would like to thank.
Everybody else turns off. Yeah.
Do you hear me? Do you hear me?
Yeah, Karima.
Yes, Karima, go ahead.
First of all, I would like to thank all the organizers, Mr. Mohammed, Mr. Imad, and our presenters. It's always nice to see Professor Kathryn and Anton, Florek with us, and it's not the first time I attend your presentations, Abdellah also. Thank you so much. Concerning students' voice, as a teacher, I've noticed that the curriculum and the content doesn't respond to students' needs. We need to we need to take what students need and what students want to learn into consideration, because in order to include them, we need to take their and this is the responsibility not only of teachers but of everyone. I'm wondering whether there will be new curricula, new programs, and I think that after COVID, things won't be the same. So we need to ways of dealing with students and make them, allow them feel a sense of belonging. From my experience as a teacher during COVID, students' motivation went so low. Only 1 or 2 students could follow with us. And it's important that we listen to our students and talk to them and let them say what they have to say and take them into consideration. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Karima. I think we should go ahead and start answering those questions. And if there are any more questions, please feel free to just share them on the chat box. Thank you.
Can I go for that reaction?
Go ahead, Abdellah.
Okay, thanks, Karima, for your question. But I think learning from research that the future of education is going, especially in terms of curricular development, is going to be kind of individualization based. Means because learners are unique and individual, they need unique curricula for them. And I think schools, one of the schools' targets should be ways to respond to everybody's capabilities and everybody's wants. And I think there's an example that you are familiar with, which we call the mosaic classroom. It's going to be like farm garden where we have different courses, different, I would say, passions that could be developed according to the variation among the learners. So I think any school that has to be effective should take into consideration what the learners want to learn and what they want to be in the future, and try to cater for those needs, whether at the individual or collective basis. But at least they have to have those, I would say, roots that are leading them towards self-actualization and agency. My reaction to the first question that you raised, Mohammed, that of how can we move forward from here, I think is linked to this. If we listen to the youth and what they want to become and what are their relevant concerns, I think relevance is one of the important things that are going to create this sense of belonging to the classrooms, and then going to clip up students more and more psychologically and academically to their institutions as the nucleus of community building. That's my reaction to the question, Mohammed.
Excellent. Go ahead, Kathryn. Go ahead.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I think has been quite amazing is the incredible creative ways that many young people have found to express their voice. We just happen in my family to have a young relative who's a rap artist. So he's been rapping and his stuff has been amazing. But if I look at art and music and poetry and different things, young people are expressing their views in different kinds of ways. So I think for you, and there you are, you know, as teachers and schools, it's how do you engage young people in a way of telling their story of how it's been for them and how they see the future in different kind of ways. Now, all of these are great academically, I mean, because the skills that they have, that some of the skills that young people have been developing during lockdown have been really fantastic. But how do we, let's find new ways and saying, you know, what was it like for you? And enabling young people to express all that in any form that they want. Some of the rap stuff that I've been listening to has been quite political in terms of views about the government and concerns on Black Lives Matters and lots of worries about that. Some of it has been so humorous, witty, creative, all of these talents that our young people have. So in trying to bring their voices on board, there are many, many ways that we can do it. And also as an academic, you know, in many countries, people say, oh, we need to do some proper research on young people and what they're saying. And I'm going, yeah, but why not? You've got this cohort of young people that we met in Morocco, train them to be researchers and get them to be getting the voice of young people. So whatever you're doing, developing that sense of agency and young people really feeling that they can make a difference. But I mean, some of the creative stuff that young people have done has just been fantastic. And I think we need to build on all of those different things.
And it speaks to what Anton mentioned, and I'll just let Anton say what I think I think he will be talking about. It's very consistent with his philosophy. Anton?
You carry on. I'll pick up.
It's this focus on people to people, and people as empowerers of other peoples in these communities of practice. I think that's what I thought you will be heading to. But please elaborate, Anton.
To kind of elaborate on that, one of the things that I think this period will trigger is going back to my kind of 3 citizenships, really, is not, we are inevitably part of a global community. So we have responsibilities to our own families, our responsibilities to our own immediate societies, i.e. countries, but we also have responsibilities beyond that. And our education systems have to create that sense of belonging beyond the immediate context. We need to develop young people with the skills to feel comfortable rubbing up against different cultures and different ways of working. The other thing I'd say is, and this is from a colleague in Morocco, really, and I'm paraphrasing this, but he said something in one of our very kind of animated discussions when we were over, is it's time we stop treating children's brains as we need to start treating children's brains as processors, not hard drives. And I thought that was a really concrete way of saying, you know, the process of schooling that is based on longitudinal transfer of knowledge from a teacher to a student, and then an exam system that merely asks them to regurgitate it, is fundamentally, increasingly not going to prepare young people for the 4th industrial revolution and a world which is radically reshaping as we speak. All that's happened in the last 4 months is things have been condensed massively, and they're going to shoot out to a different place in a very accelerated way, you know. And the final point I'd make is, I think it really is time that schooling had a great deal more humility in it. I mean, if we had time, I've got a slide of some of the outputs of the workshop with the young people from Morocco, but they're very clear. Those 22 people we worked with were very clear. And they were also very articulate about their own responsibility in the process of schooling not working for them as well. It wasn't like they were saying, no one's listening to me, you know, the teachers don't know me and all the rest of it. That came in, but they were also saying, if we're going to make a classroom a place of belonging, that includes everybody in it, including the teachers. So what is our role as young people, you know, in that process? I thought that was really powerful, articulate and compelling, you know. I'm not so sure that young people of the same age in the UK would necessarily have that same wisdom immediately to convey.
I would like to segue on what Anton, because Larvi asked me to conclude, and there is no better way to conclude than just segueing on what Anton on the sentence, or the last, maybe one of the last pieces of advice that Anton has shared with us, is that he would like a little bit more humility in schools. and the reason why, for me, that's just the perfect way to conclude this meeting, is that it's very much tied to what we have discussed as effective practices for school effectiveness. Because at the end of the day, humility, when it's genuine, it's very tentative, and it's an expression of faith in the complexity of knowledge, and it's an expression of faith in the fact that learning is continuous and progressive and never ends. And it's also an expression of faith in the fact that it's not the teachers or the school principals that control this knowledge, but students and the community are constructors and co-constructors of this knowledge as well. And I think this is when you start tapping the full potential of those students. And I'm just tying this to what you all kind of referenced in different ways, in different terminology, but using this agency and resilience is very, very important. That sense of maybe the student as a processor, or maybe that the sense of the school as a facilitator of this transformation. It's not that this school is going to just equip you with all the knowledges, maybe the knowledge that you need, and then you're ready to take on the world. It's much more than that. Because remember that if I ask every single one of our participants here what made a difference in their lives and why are they the way they are right now, school is a factor, but there are many other factors that we need to take into consideration. And this is, for me, the core factor is agency and reflection, self-direction, which are all very important. And I think we refer to them in the literature as this metacognition, this meta-knowledge, the thinking about the learning process, the transition of the student in where we equip this student to maybe help this student start seeing themselves not just as a mere recipient, but at the same time as a leader of her or in her own transformation. And this is very important because, again, imagine we were hit by COVID-19 right now, and schools are shut down, and some students have the technology and maybe they are making the best use of it. Others have the technology and they feel utterly bored. Others don't have the technology, but they figured out other solutions to continue on learning. Like the question that we need to raise, not just as a nation, but at a global level, is what if this internet shuts down? What if Google and all the internet providers decided that, okay, no more internet? How are we going to survive? Are we going to go back to the Stone Ages, or we have forgotten, or maybe we shouldn't be forgetting about the primordial mission of the school, is that being the ultimate, or maybe ultimate is too strong, but being a very important enabler, empowerer of the students to self-actualize. I'm borrowing Abdellah's phrase, because self-actualization is about resilience, is about independence, is about the ability to seize the opportunities you have, but also create the opportunities when you don't have other opportunities available. And for us, this is powerful. And maybe the question that we all raise as teachers and educators and school principals, community members, parents, because parents, as you know, in the last 6 months have been playing important roles as teachers, family members, community members, all of us. What is it like? What is this non-negotiable about what it is that the school need to help equip the students with? Because again, we do not. If we cultivate or nurture, I would call it a mindset where a student is a victim and is going to be a victim without major assistance, then we haven't really contributed to the emancipation of this human being, be it a man or a woman. Because again, the full access, or maybe the full enjoyment of that sense of emancipation, where they are fully aware of their capabilities as creators of knowledge, co-creators of knowledge, but at the same time, beneficiaries of knowledge as well. So maybe this is more of an overall reaction and maybe reflection about what I've heard, and at the same time maybe a reaction to some of the questions that were very pragmatic and realistic, and at the same time asking some major I would call the existential questions about the rich have the internet, what about those who don't? But again, this is also a big question, because maybe if we had time, and maybe there is going to be a next time, like how are kids doing in marginalized neighborhoods in the UK? In the UK, there are kids who don't have access to internet. They don't have access to computers. Now, how do we deal with those situations? Because for us, it's critical also to start thinking about what it is that we could do really to challenge marginalization and to make sure that these kids are part of this learning process. They tap the learning opportunities in an equitable manner, but at the same time, always remembering that in their essence, they are free agents, free human beings, and we need to make sure that they have the wherewithal and the assets to enjoy that freedom through continuous learning. So that's
thank you so much, Mohammed. Thank you. I personally really appreciate, I mean, this conclusion, which not only wraps up, but also it has given us a vision as how to cater for COVID-19 and beyond COVID-19. I think we are running out of time. Once again, on behalf of the Moroccan Center for Civic Education, in partnership with the Moroccan Association of Teachers of English, we would like to thank our distinguished speakers, Professor Kathryn, Professor Anton Florek, and Professor Abdellah Yousfi, President of the Moroccan Association of Teachers of English. I would like also to thank warmly our audience, all of the participants who have been able to join us. And thank you for your positive reactions and for your questions and for having been able to participate in the debate. I would like also to thank Otis Company for having kindly provided us with their Zoom platform. I shouldn't forget our friend Roberto Tio Molina for the wonderful and excellent video. And I think that's it. Mohammed, anything to add?
No, again, it's always a source of thrill to see Anton and Kathryn and Abdellah, because again, we're brothers and sisters in arms. And
Sure.
and I think we're taking this matter very, very seriously. ICSI 2020 didn't end it. It was just the beginning. And I would like to extend my thanks to them, but also to extend my thanks to all our colleagues who attended here, and that we have intersected with them in various ways, because again, that's exactly how we're going to kind of strengthen this community of practice and this community of leaders that is going to help promote education, not just in Morocco, but all over the world. So let's stay in touch and stay connected, because there are going to be more events coming.
Yes, more events coming, Mohammed, and we will be more than happy to share with you all of the presentations today. So Abdellah Marjani, our Moroccan Center for Civic Education coordinator. I was going to forget. Thank you so much, Abdellah, for being heavily engaged and involved in putting everything together to this webinar. Just a last note, this webinar has been taped, recorded. All what we need is just a consent, just saying yes, no problem to the recording. Anton, Kathryn, Abdellah?
No problem.
Is that fine with you?
It's fine.
Yes,
with me.
of course.
Because participants, thank you, because participants and more participants, you know, I've been receiving, I mean, so many texts and so many WhatsApp messages asking me for, you know, in order to share this webinar. So again, thank you so much, and we look forward to our forthcoming webinar.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much.
so much.
Thank you.
And
Bye-bye.
bye-bye.
Bye.